Okay, so next part we will be looking at the menstrual cycle. So the menstrual cycle on average lasts about 28 days, but of course it varies from woman to woman, female to female, because it is easily influenced by things like stress, emotional problems, mental fatigue, diet. Okay, so menstruation period goes anywhere between 5 to 7 days. Of course, same thing varies from person to person. So unlike the male sperm, which is generated from time to time in the testes, female ova are already present in the ovaries. So during puberty, whereby the female hormones estrogen and progesterone, they have increased in concentration. That's when maturation of the ovum will start to take place. Okay, so day 1 to 14 is what we call the follicular phase. So follicular phase itself, you can see that I have got this little tiny ovum, and then subsequently this one here, this oocyte or the egg cell is increasing in size. So which means there is an increase in estrogen concentration. So as the estrogen concentration increases, subsequently this will then lead to a ruptured follicle in which a matured ovum will be released into the oviduct. So this matured follicle is the Graafian follicle itself. So once the Graafian follicle bursts, the ovum will be released into the oviduct. So what happens to the remaining of the follicle? It doesn't just disappear into nowhere. So this remaining of the follicle will then be used to develop the corpus luteum. So the main purpose of the corpus luteum is to maintain the second hormone in the female body system, which is the progesterone. So progesterone, it will cause further thickening of the uterine lining and also to maintain the uterine lining in the event that there is fertilization. So if there is no fertilization, eventually the corpus luteum will break down. So since it is responsible for maintaining progesterone concentration, once it starts to break down, progesterone levels will also drop. So the uterine lining is no longer maintained and menstruation through the cervix will then take place. Okay, so you have the menstrual cycle over here whereby I have got the different phases. So what you can see is that on day 0, whereby there's menstruation phase happening here, you can see that there is a drop in the uterine lining thickness. So do bear in mind that estrogen and progesterone levels never ever drop to 0. They do drop to a low level but never to a complete 0 itself. So estrogen levels will then start to rise shortly after menstruation. So during this period, the increment in the estrogen level will coincide with the increase in the thickness of the uterine lining, which then also helps the follicles to develop. So just before ovulation, day 14, okay, assuming that 28-day cycle, middle of it, which is day 14, ovulation happens, the surge in the estrogen levels happen before ovulation. Now, hormones, they don't work instantaneously. You have to give it time for the body system to recognize and acknowledge and for responses to take place. So over here, this will then cause a surge. Okay, this surge will then lead to the ovulation, which is the release of the mature ovum into the oviduct. So once it is released, the Graafian follicle will then form the corpus luteum. So this corpus luteum will take over the manufacturing of the increment in progesterone levels. So progesterone levels start to rise, and you can see correspondingly the uterine lining thickness is maintained. So this corpus luteum that produces the increment in progesterone would also cause a decrease in estrogen. So why is this so? This increase in progesterone will actually inhibit estrogen levels. Now, why is it important to inhibit estrogen levels? So when you think back, estrogen is needed for ovulation. So in the event there is fertilization during this period, okay, you don't want a second ovulation to take place. So that, which is also why if there is fertilization, progesterone levels throughout the pregnancy will continue to inhibit estrogen levels to prevent a second ovulation. However, over time, if there is no fertilization, corpus luteum will eventually degrade. It doesn't stay forever, even in the process of fertilization. So eventually it degrades, which then lead to the decrease in progesterone levels. So decrease in progesterone levels, subsequently menstruation will take place, and you can see the estrogen levels will decrease slightly, which is not really in syllabus. And LH and FSH, this has been taken out of syllabus for now, so we don't have to worry too much about it. So FSH in brief detail is just these developing follicles are stimulated by the FSH, which is the follicle stimulating hormone produced by the brain at the anterior pituitary gland. So FSH stimulates the follicles, which then cause these follicles to produce estrogen. So the increase in the follicle, as the follicle size increases, estrogen levels also increases, which can explain the surge over here. Okay, so estrogen also needed for growth and repair. So once it grow and repair, that will enable any possible implantation to take place. So luteinizing hormone, also part of the brain, has been taken out of syllabus. So fertile period, this one, please bear in mind, is 3 days before and 3 days after fertilization. So if the fertile period is on day 14, which is, if the ovulation is on day 14, so 28-day cycle, day 14, 30-day cycle, day 15. Then for 28-day cycle, day 11 and day 17 will be the fertile period. So corpus luteum continues to secrete estrogen and progesterone. Okay, so this part over here, also just for your own information, so you have got FSH and LH by the brain, okay, and then I have got the ovaries that produces my progesterone and my estrogen levels. Okay, now when we move on to copulation, copulation by definition is the act of mating or sexual intercourse. So this will then enable fertilization to take place. So during fertilization, the haploid sperm, keyword is fuse. Okay, so the haploid sperm will fuse with the haploid egg nucleus, and you have a diploid zygote, not diploid baby, diploid zygote. So remember earlier on I mentioned that fertilization has to take place over at the oviduct. Not here, not here. Okay, because once there is fertilization, you need to give it time to form the zygote. The zygote then undergoes several mitotic divisions, not meiosis. So meiosis only takes place during fertilization, whereby you have the fusion of two haploid gametes. So once the fusion takes place, subsequently to form zygote, there's a lot of mitotic division. So increase in the number of cells. These are also what you call the stem cells, the embryos, the embryonic stem cells. So I have got embryo formation, which has got multiple number of cells. So as the embryo follows through the oviduct, being swept gently by the cilia and by muscular contractions of the fallopian tube, subsequently it will then implant into the uterine lining. Okay, so it takes about 5 days to reach the uterus. So once it reaches the uterus, implantation will start to take place and development of organs. So once it becomes an organ, once it develops organs, it becomes a fetus. Okay, so at no point in time should you call it a baby. It's a zygote followed by an embryo and followed by a fetus. So as the fetus develops, it will be enclosed in the amniotic sac. So inside the amniotic sac contains the amniotic fluid. So the functions of the amniotic fluid, you do have to know: protection, allowing for fetal movement, not baby movement, and constant temperature, protection from the environment. So the mother can go into an air-conditioned room, she can be outside whereby it's slightly hotter, but the fetus is still protected. Okay, subsequently, just before childbirth, if you watch those TV shows, and then the so-called water bag breaks, okay, the breaking of the water bag is the amniotic sac, and the amniotic fluid will then subsequently be released out, which provides lubrication during childbirth. Okay, so during the entire growth period, the developing fetus is unable to eat or drink or breathe. So over here inside the maternal cavity, oxygen and food is placed into the developing fetus via diffusion itself. So at this junction, you have got finger-like projections, which are the embryonic blood capillaries. So these embryonic blood capillaries itself increases the surface area. So you want to carry food and oxygen from the mother into the fetus, and of course waste products from the fetus out to the mother. So the embryonic capillaries or the fetal blood capillaries, they are surrounded by the maternal spaces but they are kept separated. Okay, the separation is very necessary because of two reasons. Number one, blood pressure of the mother is much higher than the fetus, so it can possibly kill the fetus. Number two, in some rare cases, the blood group of the fetus and the mother is not identical. So the mother can be, for example, blood type O, and the fetus genetically can be blood type A. So if the fetus blood crosses into the mother's blood, there can be agglutination that will take place, or vice versa as well, which can be very life-threatening. So umbilical cord, do take note of this one over here. Two umbilical arteries. Okay, artery means away. So umbilical is coming from the fetus. So embryonic waste is being carried from the fetus to the placenta and to the mother. The umbilical vein is only one, is containing oxygenated blood and food substances from the placenta, that means from the mother to the fetus. So it's more important to carry waste away as fast as possible, which is why you have got two umbilical arteries. Okay, so functions of the placenta, you want to exchange substances. Okay, progesterone, as repeatedly mentioned earlier, is to maintain the uterine lining thickness. So during the pregnancy, if at any point in time the mother's progesterone levels drop, there can be risk of the uterine lining being shed and the embryo being discharged out. Transportation of antibodies to build the fetus immunity. Okay,